and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be talking about all the books I read between June and September. And by the way, if I'm looking down, it's because I have, as usual, my little notebook here with my notes and all the books that I read between these months. So this wrap up, I'm going to divide between romance and all the other general fiction that I read, because if you're going to divide between categories, the genre that I read the most was romance, and then we have a few other genres, but not enough that I think makes sense for me to divide between very specific little genres. But let's start because we have quite a bit of books to talk about. There are some books that will be on videos or were on videos, so I'm going to try and give a more brief review for those books and then talk a little bit more about the books that won't be in any other video. So let's start with romance. So the first book in this category is The Wingman by Stephanie Archer. This book has already been in a video, and basically in The Wingman, this is a best friends to lovers. It's a friends to lovers, forced proximity, roommate, romance. And this book follows Hayden and Darcy. They have been friends since college, and Hayden always had this massive crush on Darcy. But Darcy, very early on in their friendship, she starts dating his other friend. And now, many years later, Hayden is the star hockey player in Vancouver. And this book, by the way, I forgot to say, but it is a third book in the Vancouver Storm series. But going back to the plot of this book. Basically, Darcy, she recently broke up with her boyfriend. She got off their engagement and she's now living with Hayden for a while. And she wants to become a player because she feels like she spent so long of her life, so many years of her life in a relationship where she wasn't really that happy. So she now wants to go out and date around, and she asks Hayden to teach her how to do so because she has no practice and Hayden has a lot of practice in casually dating. But Hayden has a massive crush on her, and this book basically follows as the two go from being friends to being lovers. And it was just so funny and so fun to read this book, just like all the other books on the Vancouver Storm series. And if you look way into it, you'll see that there are some things that are kind of questionable, some things that might raise some questions about this book, like it barely talks anything about their families or their backgrounds except for this couple. But the experience of reading The Wingman, it was just so fun, and there are very few books that can beat or can reach on the level of the Vancouver Storm series for me in terms of entertainment. So when they were giving The Wingman 5 stars, because truly, it's a book that when I picked it up, I just couldn't put it down. I wanted to read. It's a book I want to reread whenever I feel like I'm not in the greatest of moods, or I read not great news about the world, or you hear about wars and everything else, not great things happening around the world. This is a series that I always gravitate to, so I can't not give 5 stars to The Wingman. And then another book that I read, it was for the same video, which I think was Reading Hockey Romances for a Week, but I read Icebound by Meredith Treff, and this book was the complete opposite of The Wingman. So Icebound, it was advertised as an age gap romance, I think a Grumpy Sunshine romance, and I went into it expecting also a funny, fluffy romance novel, because that's usually what hockey romances are. The thing about this book, I talked more about it in the video. This book follows, as a legacy to this book, I forgot the names of the main characters, but we follow a 33-year-old goalie and I think a 23-year-old college student, and they meet because she is his Lyft driver, and on the first time that they meet, they get the middle of a car accident. There's a car accident that happens. And the thing about this book is that, one, the pacing wasn't great, the mood, the vibes of this book weren't great, just because they weren't consistent throughout the whole story. Sometimes it got quite dark, and in others it felt like more of a fluffy rom-com. The male main character, sorry, I just can't get behind him. He just felt so annoying. He kept thinking about the age gap between him and the main character and the female main character. And while it is good to think about the age gap, especially considering she's like 22, 23 and he's 33, the amount of times and like his mental dialogue, it felt like he was just putting so much pressure in, and he kept reminding us of this age gap for so many times, but at the same time he will never leave our female main character alone. I feel like the movements of the scene and of the characters, kind of like the choreography of a scene, it was really hard to follow because of the way this book was written. And also a major thing about this book, it's because one of the plot points of this book is that he's a 33 hockey player, a 33-year-old athlete, and there's a lot of talk of him retiring. And you just need to make a quick Google search to know that when hockey players, most of them, especially like the top hockey players, which this character is supposed to be, they, unless they have a serious injury, they will probably not retire at 33. And most athletes, especially top athletes, which is the case for this character, they usually don't retire at 33 unless they have some kind of health condition, they suffer an accident, or they have some serious injury. Most of them won't retire at 33. So it doesn't make sense for this character, for this talk of retirement in this book, especially because the talk comes mostly from the outside. It comes mostly from like commentators, from sports analysts, and I was reading that and I was like, what? It was really weird, and overall the vibes and the pacing and the story in this book just felt weird. And there is also this one character which I know, I saw that this book is a series. The second book in the series, I'm not reading it because it just felt like a stirring pot of popular tropes. And then the third book will be about a character that I just don't like. He's supposed to be like the flirty young guy, but his flirting comes off as harassment towards women. So I'm not continuing on with the series. I ended up giving Icebound 2 stars. And then the next romance I read was Close Off by Stephanie Archer. This is the third book from the Vancouver Storm series. It was also one of my most anticipated releases of the year but basically Close Off follow Alexei and Georgia. We meet Alexei in the first book of the Vancouver Storm series, and then we meet Georgia. We start hearing about Georgia in the second book, in the Fake Out. We meet her a little bit better in the Wingman, but basically Alexei and Georgia, they hate each other. Every time they are around each other, they are fighting. So when we find out in the end of the Wingman that their book will be a marriage of convenience, I was really excited to read this book. I was really excited to see what Stephanie Archer would write with this book. How would these two characters go from being enemies, like truly hating each other's guts, trying to, I don't know, like they truly hate each other, to becoming lovers. And then what would be the mental gymnastics that would justify the two thinking it would be a good idea for them to get married. And this book did not disappoint. So basically Alexei, he wants the Canadian citizenship because he was born in Russia. His parents are Russian, but he moved to Canada when he was like 6 years old. His life is in Canada, and he never actually managed to get his citizenship. Ever since he started playing hockey professionally, he has struggled with getting the citizenship. It always keeps getting denied, and he's really scared that if he retires, he will be deported back to Russia, and he doesn't want to be deported back to Russia because his family is in Canada, his life is in Canada. I don't think he has even been to Russia back ever since he was like 6 years old. And Georgia, on the other hand, she's a doctor. She is the team doctor, and she has this research relating to athlete injury recovery, but she recently lost the federal funding for this research. But she's the granddaughter of this very wealthy man, or her dad is technically part of this very wealthy old money Canadian family, even though her parents, they are kind of strange from that family. But when her grandfather passed away, he left her this giant will with millions and millions and millions of dollars on it. And the only reason why she still doesn't have access to this will is because she needs to be married to have access to the will. So she and Alexei decide to strike the agreement where he marries her so he can get his citizenship, and she marries him so she can have access to the will and she can fund her research. And at the beginning of the book, I hated Alexei because the things he thinks about her, the things he says to her, the way he treats her, sorry, it's indefensible. There is no excuse. He says, oh, but she went to private school, she comes from a rich family, and he uses that to justify treating her really, really, really badly for absolutely no reason. And for me, that's a no thank you. I don't think the fact that someone went to private school or they come from a really good family is just these two factors is a really good reason for you to go and be disrespectful to them, for you to go and be rude to them, and to just say some of the things this man says to her. And yet I love this book because for some reason Stephanie Archer, she managed to kind of redeem these characters and made me really enjoy this book. It's also, I think, because of their dynamic. They bigger with each other, they prank each other. There's like one scene where he throws her shoes away because her high heels drives him nuts. He gets jealous of her bunnies. She sleepwalks and keeps going to sleep with him because she sleepwalks, and then she tries to find someone to cuddle. Just reading this book again, it just felt, there's just something about it. It's just so funny, so I just can't put it down, and it's just such an entertaining read. And I ended up giving Close of 5 stars. Again, if you look if you have a critical lens on this story, you might not love it enough. Might not love it enough, but I wouldn't have given it 5 stars if I just kept looking at it from a critical lens. But it was just so entertaining, and it's one of those books, the Vancouver Storm series, it's just one of those series that does something to my brain that really talks to me, so I gave it 5 stars. I just really love the series. Truly, truly great entertainment for my brain. The next romance novel that I actually read before Close Off, but for some reason on my Goodreads, I forgot to log it in, and then I logged that I read this book afterwards. And for some reason I always put it afterwards on my list. But I read First Time Caller by P.K. Barson. So the premise for First Time Caller sounded really interesting. So we follow Lucy and Aiden. Lucy, she's a single mother, and she has a really good relationship with her baby daddy. And her daughter, she's like a twin, I think she's like 12 or something like that. Her daughter, one day, she goes to this romance hotline, to a romance radio show, asking for tips so she can help her mother get into a relationship, because she thinks her mother might be feeling lonely, because her mother's always single, and she thinks her mother might be lonely. She's worried about her mother, so she calls for help. And then Lucy walks in on her daughter talking, and she ends up picking up the phone, and she has this talk with the radio host, who is Aiden. Aiden, he's the host of this romance or dating TV show, dating tips TV show. It's a dating tips radio show. And the thing about Aiden is that he fell out of love with love. He doesn't believe in love anymore. And the ratings for his radio show are suffering because he clearly doesn't believe in love anymore. But his call with Lucy, it goes viral. So the radio station, they have this idea of basically creating this kind of like a segment inside this radio show where Lucy tries to find her soulmate. Lucy tries to find someone she wants to date long term. And it's a romance novel, so you can guess that those two, they are going to fall in love with each other. And while I really like Lucy, I like Lucy's daughter, I like all the characters surrounding the main characters, I didn't like Aiden. He gave me the ick And the moment he gave me the ick, I feel like there wasn't really a coming back for this novel, especially because it's a romance novel, and I feel like in a romance novel you need to like the main characters. You might not love them, you might not, in real life you might not like them, but you at least need to like them as a couple, like them as characters, and I didn't like Aiden. He gave me the ick. So every romance section just was, it kept giving me the ick, but I liked everything surrounding these characters. Hopefully it makes sense, but basically I ended up giving First Time Caller 2.5 stars because I like the writing, I like the characters, except Aiden. So it didn't work as a romance novel for me. But I do want to continue reading the series because I know the second book in the series will follow the weatherman, and it is a romance between the radio station weatherman and the TV station next door weatherwoman, and apparently they have something like kind of like of a beef going on. So the premise for also the second book in the series sounds really interesting, so I want to continue reading the series. The next romance novel that I have to talk with you about is Slapshot by Chelsea Curto. This is the third book in the dissapointing series, also hockey romance. So there is a pattern there, but earlier this year I read Power Play by this authors in the same series and I really enjoyed it. And then I read Slapshot. In Slapshot we follow Hudson and Madeline. Hudson is kind of like the golden boy of the team, and at the beginning of the book he's looking for a new private chef. And Madeline, she's a single mother, her daughter is deaf, and she recently was fired from her previous job in this very fancy restaurant in Las Vegas because someone bought out the restaurant and they want to redo the whole restaurant and the whole staff. So she's looking for a job, and they have a mutual friend who decides to kind of pair them up. They tell him, hey, this is a really private, reliable chef that won't keep harassing you and doesn't care about your job, so hire her. So she ends up moving to Washington, and she ends up going to live with him actually because apparently she's struggling to find a place to live and he lives alone, so he offers her to go and live in his apartment because this is something that only happens in romance novels. And basically this book follows as they go from basically acquaintances to friends to trusting each other to becoming lovers. And overall I really like the book from an entertainment point of view, but there were just some really little quirks about this book that I didn't like. I didn't like that the side characters, Madeline, she's introduced to the friend group, and the friend group, they kind of are too friendly too quickly to her, so that kind of annoyed me. I didn't like the pacing because I felt because of Madeline's backstory, she has trust issues, especially when it comes to relationships. So it made sense that this book needed to be a slow burn and you needed to have that build up, and you needed to follow the two characters not only becoming friends but Madeline learning how to trust Hudson. But because I feel like we had so many things to go through, the pacing just felt weird. It felt like they went from acquaintance to friends to trusting each other, and then from trusting each other to becoming lovers. It was like too fast, too quickly, and it was just not ideal. And also this book was advertised as slow burn, but the slow burn in this book is like it takes 60% of the book for them to kind of get together, and for me that's not slow burn, that's just a regular romance novel. For me slow burn is like they need to get like 80%. A true slow burn, they need to get at least to 80% without being lovers. So overall I really like this book from an entertainment point of view, but there were quirks that I really didn't love. So I ended up giving 4 stars. Also another thing, I think I will talk about it in the video if I ever get to edit it, but while reading this book I found so many typos and just things that I feel like this book could have been edited a little bit better. It needed to have at least another round of editing. And looking at the schedule where Chelsea Curto is releasing the books in this series, I feel like I would love if she would take a little bit more time between releasing books to have this another round of editing, just make sure the book is really set and there is less typos, less of these grammatical errors, because I understand why she would want to release all the books so fast. And also I kind of like that because I like the series, so I like reading them, and the fact that I don't need to wait that long for the next book in the series, that's nice. But also maybe it would be beneficial for her if she would take a little bit more time just to edit out the typos. And yes, I ended up giving Slapshot 4 stars. The next book on the romance section is Done and Dusted by Lila Sage. This is the first book in, I think, the Rebel Blue Ranch series, and this is a series of small town cowboy romances. And in this book we follow Clementine, or better known as Amy, and Luke. Clementine, I think she's a barrel racer, a rodeo barrel racer, but Clementine recently suffered an accident and she kind of can't get back up on the horse because she starts having panic attacks. She starts remembering her accident, so she can't work anymore, she can't compete anymore because her job relies on her being on the back of a horse. So she decides to go back home. She goes back to this small town in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming and stay with her family without telling anyone exactly why she decided to go back home and why she decided to stop competing. And then you have Luke, who is her older brother's best friend, and he's kind of like the bad boy in town, kind of like the playboy in town. He doesn't have the best of reputations, and in her head, Amy still thinks of him like that boy from when she was a child and a teenager, the boy she grew up with, who kept pranking her with her brother. But when she comes back into town, things quickly change. She realizes he is different from when she was a teenager. And to think about this book, one, I feel like this book it should have been a little bit longer, so we would have a little bit more of a build-up. It was a little bit too insta-lovey, like they look at each other and they're like, wow, they changed, they're hot now. It's kind of like When Did You Get Hot, the song by Sabrina Carpenter, was a book. It's kind of that, but for me personally it just doesn't work. I feel like the way it was written, the vocabulary wasn't there. It felt a little bit, young is not the word, but not as complex, the feelings that these characters feel. And I didn't love Done and Dusted, so I ended up giving it 2 stars. And I was thinking, I'm not putting down this whole series for good, because the second book I don't want to read, which I think is Swift and Settled, but the third book, which I think is Lost and Lassoed, which follows Emmy's older brother and her best friend, that one I'm really interested about, because the dynamic between her older brother and her friend, it's just really interesting. I want to see how they go from enemies to disliking each other to lovers. It just sounds like a really funny, good time, even if it isn't kind of like the way I like my romance novels to be written. But moving on to the next book, I read The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. And this is a book that I went into it blindly. I knew it was a romance between kind of like this woman who was left at the altar, and years later she would have an affair, or she would have a romance with her ex-groom's brother, who was kind of responsible for the groom for leaving her at the altar. And in some ways it is that. The thing about this book is that that is the premise, that really is the premise. But one thing I didn't know about this book, it's not only that our female main character, she's a wedding planner and she is competing to get this job, and when she arrives at the job interview, she finds out that she will need to be working with her ex-fiance and his brother, and that's how they reconnect, and that's where the romance starts to brew. But the things I didn't know about this book, and other things I didn't know about this book, one, the female main character is Brazilian, which cool, I also am. It was kind of cool to read about little quirks of Brazilian culture on page, even though at some point some of the things she would do, and it almost feels like the author is kind of trying to say this is the whole country's culture, but in reality it's not. There are some things that are the country's culture as a whole, but there are things that are more like regional quirks, regional culture, and that's fine. But the shocking part for me, the female main character has my name. She literally has my name, and I started reading it, and for a moment I was kind of worried that that would take me off of the book, because every time someone would call her, would they call my name? Luckily they call her by a nickname, so that didn't bother that much, even though sometimes they would call her by her name. And there was a point, there was a smut scene, and he called her by her name. That was so weird, but that surprisingly didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. But overall, as a book, it was kind of meh. I didn't particularly like Carolina or Lina. I didn't like Max, who was the male main character. I didn't particularly like their dynamic. I wish there was more build up, and it was fine. I don't regret reading it, but also it was fine. I don't think I will be thinking about this book. I know I won't be thinking about this book because it's been a while since I read it, and I haven't thought about it ever since. Whenever I see the cover of this book on my Kindle, the first thing I think is, oh, she has my name. And that's all I think about when I think of The World's Best Man. And I ended up giving it 3 stars. Now moving on to all the other books I read between June and September. So kind of like channel fiction, but we have channel fiction, we have non-fiction, we have classics, we have fantasy. And no, we don't have any sci-fi in this one. That will be in the next reading wrap up. We have some thriller, we have like quotes in fiction. Let's start talking. So first I read The Wedding People by Alison Aspect. This is kind of a very popular book that I've seen everywhere, and it basically follows Phoebe. She is this college professor who she has been going through a very rough patch. She got divorced, her job is kind of not great, she's very depressed. So one day she decides to book her dream vacation to her dream hotel in Rhode Island, and there she plans to go to the other realm. And the moment she gets there, she finds out that she is the only person in this hotel that is not there for a wedding. And while she's on the elevator to go to her room, she ends up meeting the bride, and they just form kind of like an attachment. They start to become friends, and this book is so, how can I say, there is a video that I need to edit where I talk more about this book, but this book is more about Phoebe meeting the wedding people, because she in the end she ends up not going to the other realm, and she ends up joining this group of people that are going to the wedding, and she ends up meeting them. And I don't know what to say. I think I'm going to let the review for this book for the video where I read the book, but it's about just so, it was a surprisingly nice reading experience. It was a surprisingly nice book, even though it does deal with some very heavy themes, and ended up giving it 5 stars. It was just such an amazing book. Then I read it, Blade as It Lays by Joan Didion, and by read it I mean I got to 50% of it and then I decided to DNF it. So Blade as It Lays, we follow this woman who she's married to this Hollywood hotshot. I think he's a director, and they are basically, it follows this group of people in Hollywood who are unlikable. They are kind of ruining their lives, they are problematic, they are doing drugs, they are doing very questionable things. They're very unlikable, they're not great people. And starting this book, I was really enjoying it, but as we started to go through 50% to the book, I started to lose interest, and then I started to kind of get bored, and I was just counting the pages until I finished reading this book. And last year I read another book by Joan Didion. I read The White Album, which is a collection of essays, and I felt the same thing about that book, about White Album and Blade as It Lays. For me, it feels like it's not necessarily bad, but I just don't think the author is for me. It starts really nice, but then around halfway I just lose interest on the narrative and on the writing style, and I just don't think Joan Didion is the author for me, so I decided to DNF it. And then I read Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a book that follows 2 timelines. We follow Hannah. She's a 29-year-old woman who she recently was in a kind of complicated affair. She was going out with this man who she later finds out he's married, and for the past like 10 years of her life she has been kind of moving around the United States. She never stays long in one place, and after this disastrous affair she decides to go back and move back to her hometown of Los Angeles. And when she gets there, she reconnects with her ex-boyfriend, who she believes might be her soulmate. They used to date in high school, and they broke up because he went off to college, but they always had this feeling that they might be soulmates. So she's faced with this decision. She goes to this party to celebrate the fact that she went back to her hometown, and she's faced with the decision of either leaving the party with her ex-boyfriend or leaving alone. And we follow her life. We follow two timelines. One from the moment she decides to leave with her ex-boyfriend, and one from the moment she decides to leave alone or with her friends and not with her ex-boyfriend. And in one timeline we follow her romance with her ex-boyfriend, and in another one she suffers a really bad accident and she ends up spending months in a hospital, spends months without being able to walk, and we follow her recovery journey, and there is another romance going on in that timeline. And the thing about this book, I like Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing. It's kind of the same feelings I had for some of other Taylor Jenkins Reid books. But I like the writing, I like the concept, but the delivery is just not that for me. There was one timeline in this book, which is a timeline where she lives with her ex-boyfriend and her romance with her ex-boyfriend, where I just didn't care about it, in part because we just get told that he might be her soulmate. We don't see the build-up for their relationship. We don't really get that much. We don't get to see that much why we should believe that they are soulmates and not just people that get along with each other. And then in the other timeline, we get to see her reconnect with her estranged family. We get to see her friends have epiphanies about their own lives. We get to see the build-up and kind of the birth of this other romance and why would these characters get along. And from that timeline I really liked. And that timeline for me personally it worked better. So I ended up giving it maybe Another Life 3 stars. And then after that, I reread. I listened to it. I listened to Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I read this book a few years ago and it's one of my favorite books ever. And listening to it, it just proved to me it's one of my favorite books ever. This story just does something to my brain. Jane Austen's writing just does something to my brain. And Pride and Prejudice, it's a 5 stars. It's just, this time it just proved again that this is one of my favorite books ever. And if you haven't read Pride and Prejudice yet, you need to read it or listen to it. I only have 2 physical books that I read between this time period. And this one is one that took me quite some time because it's quite long. But I read Billy Summers by Stephen King. This is the first Stephen King book that I ever read, and I always was kind of apprehensive about reading Stephen King because I know he writes horror and I usually don't like his kind of horror, which it's something I would call jump scare horror. I like literary horror, but not what I would call jump scare horror, which is kind of like horror movies. They're just not for me. My brain can do some really crazy dreams, so I don't need any help from Stephen King to creating crazy dreams for me. So I was very apprehensive about picking up one of these books, but I heard that Billy Summers was more of a thriller and not a horror, so I decided to get it. And basically, in this book we follow Billy. He is an assassin for hire and he's embarking on his last job. And the thing about Billy is that he has this one rule: he only kills bad people. So when he gets hired for this job, it's kind of weird because it's a really high paying job, but because it is really high paying, he doesn't want to say no to it. But then things starts to fall apart. He does the job and everything starts to go wrong. And how to say this? But this book sometimes gets quite dark. This book sometimes deals with things that can trigger me and that I don't like to read about, but I couldn't stop reading it because it's the way Stephen King writes. It's the way that he tells a story, the way he creates a phrase, the order of his phrases. It's just the way that Stephen King writes that. As a writing nerd, it was so magnificent to experience the way he tells this story. And also this book has one of the most unexpected but lovable duels. I love that the characters, they're all kind of very complex and morally gray, and I'm aware that there is a siren going on, but we will ignore that. This book, it had everything for me to not love it and to DNF it, but yet I couldn't stop reading it because of the way the author writes the story. It felt just so incredible. I ended up giving it, I'm looking at my notes by the way, I ended up giving it 5 stars because it was so surprisingly good, and I do want to read other Stephen Kings in the future, but for the time period, for this moment in time, for the near future, I don't want to read his horror because not my ideal genre, so I need to see what other books that are not horror that he has already written. I know he has a book on writing which I really want to read because that sounds really interesting, especially considering the way he wrote, the way he puts sentences and the way he tells a story. Amazing. So that's Billy Summers. And then I read The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This is a romantasy that follows Oriah, who is the daughter of the Vampire King. And the thing about Oriah is that she is the only human in this vampire land, which is also, as you can imagine, being the only human in a world filled, a world full of vampires, a world that is only vampires. It's not the safest thing in the world. It's not the best. But she's the daughter of the king of the vampire land, so she's also kind of untouchable. But we start the book with Oriah deciding to go on this battle? No, it's a tournament to the death, where this group of people, mostly vampires, they will join this tournament where they entertain goddess of death, Nyaxia, and whoever wins this tournament, they get a wish granted from Nyaxia. So Oriah decides to go enter this tournament. What she doesn't expect while entering this tournament is to meet new friends and fall in love. Because then we meet Rain, who is this redhead vampire who is funny, and there's a romance between Oriah and Rain. And this book, at the beginning of the year, I really wanted to find a good romantasy, and for a moment I was thinking I might not like romantasy because I wanted a book that would do the romance right, that would do the fantasy right. And I feel like Serpent and the Wings of Night does that because you have a fantasy world, full of political intrigues. You have a really solid fantasy world, and then you have a really solid slow burn romance, and then you have the relationship between Oriah and her father, which it's a complex relationship. And this book felt just like, again, this book gets quite dark, but reading it just felt it was really wonderful. So I ended up giving The Serpent and the Wings of Night 4.75 stars, and I would definitely be continue reading the series. And then we have the only other physical book where I read this during this time period, and that is Night Beach by Rachel Yoder. This is kind of it's magical realism, or as I would like to call, light fantasy, where we follow this unnamed mother, who her husband, he is always traveling for work, so she's essentially a single mother. She's raising their child alone, and one day she starts to turn into a dog. And that's all you need to know before you start reading this book. And reading this book, at first I really liked it because it's so weird. If you like weird books, this book is weird. It's also a really good commentary on motherhood. And until the last chapter, I was really enjoying this book. And then we had the ending, and I don't like the ending for this book. I just don't like it. And the thing is, I don't know how else I would end this book. I don't know what I would change about the ending, but I just don't like the ending. So I ended up giving Night Beach 3 stars. And then before we go on to talk about the last book that I read between this time period, let's talk about the other 3 audiobooks that I started reading during this time period. So I started reading Consider Me by Becca Mack because I was feeling a reading slump, and at some point in June, July, I wasn't in the best mental headspace, so I decided to try to listen to Consider Me because I know those books does something to my brain. And after I started listening to it, I could confirm it that for some reason Consider Me by Becca Mack is one of those books that just does something to my brain, and my brain really likes it. But the audiobook was not it. The narration, especially for the male main character, was unbearable, and I stopped listening to it. One day I hope to reread the book, but not listening to it. The audiobook was just not it, babe. And then I started listening into Nexus by Yuval Nahari, and this is a non-fiction, and from what I could understand from the beginning of the book, it will talk a lot about AI. And I got to the 3rd chapter, and my subscription to Audible, my free trial for Audible, ran out, and I just didn't renew the subscription. But I do hope to read Nexus someday in the future. I might need to restart it because it's been a while. It's been a few months since I started reading those books. Also, I randomly decided to listen to it in Italian because this book, I was searching for Sapiens by the author to try to listen to Sapiens by the author, but turns out Sapiens isn't available on Audible, and Nexus is available in Italian on Audible. And thankfully I know how I understand Italian, so I started listening to it in Italian, and it was really fun to listen to it in Italian, but I just didn't finish the book. And then I also started listening to Jane Eyre by Emily Bronte. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and Jane Eyre is also one of my favorite books ever, and I got to like chapter 2 or 3, and again my subscription ran out and I just didn't renew the subscription, so it's just sitting there. I hope to read it one day soon because I really love Jane Eyre, but the subscription ran out, and as of right now I don't plan on paying for it again. Now let's talk about the last book I read between June and September. The last book I read in September, and it was The Lido by Libby Page, and this is a book I never heard about, and I don't know why I would have heard about, because this book is very British, and I'm really very much not British. I don't live in the UK, and yeah, I don't live in the UK. But basically, The Lido, you follow 86-year-old Rosemary, and you follow the 26-year-old journalist Kate, and they're in very different time periods of their lives, very different eras of their lives, but at the same time they need each other. So basically, Rosemary has been swimming in this public pool since she was a little child, since before the Second World War. And this pool is located in an area called Brixton in London. Not sure where that is because again, I'm not from London. But basically, one day they get the news that there's this real estate developer who is trying to buy the Lido so they can convert it into a private gym and on a tennis court for their tenants. And this real estate, this development company, they have been buying a lot of different houses and buildings in the area and transforming them in kind of like luxury apartments all over, that cost all over £1 million up, so she wants to buy them. And then Rosemary finds out about it. She does this little pamphlet, and Kate ends up coming across this pamphlet, and Kate starts writing a piece about the Lido and the selling of the Lido, and that piece kind of goes viral. And while Kate is in this process of reporting on what's going on in the Lido, she and Rosemary, they strike this friendship, and this book is basically about community, and it just feels like a warm hug. It felt really comforting and really cozy, and If you like Frederick Backman, you might like this book. If you just want a book that it is really cozy and just again feels like a warm hug. Maybe you like the little. I'm very much not British again, and I never expected to like a story that surrounds a public pool in London, but here I am really liking a story that surrounds a public pool in London. Ended up giving the little 5 stars. At first I was questioning whether I was going to give it 4.5 stars, 4.75 stars, because I really liked it, but you know, it was a really nice book, so I ended up giving it 5 stars. And that's all the books I read between June and September. Have you ever read any of these books? If you did, please let me know in the comments, and I hope to see you in another video very soon. Bye!